I know some of you have started your Awe of God study. Some of you just started yesterday. Some are starting today. But for the next few weeks, we're going to be focusing even Sunday mornings on this subject. And I'm going to be honest, just like I just shared. When I was even just preparing this message, there were times where I just had to stop. Because he's so much more than we can imagine. And it on one hand, it made me so excited to dive in and to know more, right? To know more of who he is and to understand better and to, we can't even begin to comprehend him. Even when we've spent a billion years in eternity, we still won't have fully comprehended who he is. But I still, want to know him more now, right? But at the same time, it kind of gave me this, sick feeling of, how have we diminished him so much on this earth and in our churches? And I'm just excited for our church to be one of the ones, there's many, but one of the ones who just refuses to put God in a box, refuses to diminish who he is, refuses to say that he has to fit in what we want or need or think is right. As I was watching the video of John Bevere for this week, one of the first questions he asked is, are you satisfied in your relationship with God? Are you satisfied with your relationship with God? And he went on to explain that for most of us, that answer is probably no. Even some of us who, we've been walking with the Lord a long time and we spend time with him every day, actually more so, we're probably going no, because there's more, right? There's more that we want of him, and the more we get to know him, the more we need. Some of this is going to be a recap, but I want to just really reiterate this idea that has been presented, that the fear of God is not to be afraid of him. It's actually to be afraid not to be with him, right? It's to have reverence and respect, but it's more than that. It's to actually trust him with our whole lives, trust him with everything, every decision, all of who we are, our whole hearts, every part of our lives. It's to have a holy awe and honor, to have a fixed commitment, to understand that his ways are just higher than our ways. His truth is just more true than anything that we can ever think is true. It's complete surrender to him. And I've told you before, I used to hate that word surrender. It's it feels like giving up. It feels like quitting. But in some ways, it's giving up on it's giving up on thinking that we know. It's giving up on the world's ways, and it's surrendering to him. And it's actually this beautiful thing where when you surrender in a war, you are admitting defeat. But when you actually surrender to him, you are admitting that he just knows better. You're admitting that yes, you've been defeated by trying to do it on your own, and you can't anymore. And so surrender to him is one of the most beautiful things. It's actually strength. It's not weakness. So many people think that, I've heard people talk about God is like a crutch. No, God's not like a crutch. God is like the one who lifts you up and carries you everywhere you need to go. It is actually strength to surrender to him, to have a holy fear and awe of him. I find it so fascinating that the idea that the fear of God actually draws us closer to him. Because most things we fear, we want to run away from. And yet with God, when we actually have a right, healthy fear and awe and respect of who he is, it actually draws us into him because we recognize, I could never do this without you. And I'm crazy to think I could. Right? It actually draws us in. Fear is so often, though, associated with the bad things in our lives. It's associated with the negative things that make us feel not good, so we want to run from it. But actually with God, it's actually this opportunity to step into him and actually allow him to be the one who gets to tell you what he made you for. Yeah. Who gets to actually lead you in the way you should go. There's bad fear, and then there's God fear. And God fear is the kind that we're going for. And God fear, like John Bevere has been saying, and I'm already seeing it as I even, I wasn't one of those people who's like, oh no, we don't need to fear God because, he talks about that. It's like those churches who think, oh, well, fear, perfect love casts out fear, so we don't need to fear. I wasn't one of those people. I always knew I needed a respect and awe, a fear of the Lord. You can't really be a Christian and read your Bible and not realize that because it's in there a lot. There's a lot about don't fear the bad things, but there's a lot about the fear of the Lord and what it does and how much we need it, right? But I think the thing is that we need to actually dive into this even deeper. Because I think that when we do, and as we do, and as we continually actually understand that we will probably never arrive anywhere. This is going to be a lifelong journey that continues into eternity, like I said, where we're just walking in this idea of God is love, and the love of God, the freedom that he brings, the grace that he gives, but at the same time, the fear and the honor and the reverence and the awe that he deserves. That this is a lifelong journey. The fear of God is understanding that without him, you are nothing. The fear of God is understanding that his ways are better, like I already said. The fear of God is understanding that he's the one who put the breath in your lungs. He is the one who woke you up this morning. You might think it was your alarm, but he's actually the one who keeps us going. He's the one who orders our steps. The fear of God is understanding that he could squash you, but he doesn't. The fear of God is understanding that he's actually set out all these things for you in your life for your good. The fear of God is understanding that when we turn to sin or we turn to things that are not what he has for us, it's going to pull us away from him, and that is why we have to step into the fear of God. It's his goodness that leads us to repentance. But I believe it's actually the awe, the respect of him that keeps us there. The fear of God is understanding that being away from him will destroy you. I was thinking a lot about this week, just about this whole idea of fear versus grace, because we like to put it as fear versus grace, but it's actually not verses, it's together. But I was thinking about the fact that a lot of people, they're almost scared to fear God because they think that's going to make them legalistic and turn into one of those, Christians who, the weird ones, like those ones. Yeah, you turn into one of those. And so instead we go, no, we're all about grace. So we can live however we want to over here because God forgives me. And it actually reminded me a lot of how I grew up. My parents are amazing, and they raised me I was the baby, so I think by the time they got to me, they were tired. So they raised me with a lot of freedom, a lot of trust, and they're just amazing parents. They love me really well. But because I think of, not because of, but just because, I'm human nature and rebellion and such, and I grew up as a PK, pastor's kid, so, it's kind of in my DNA to have to rebel a bit. And so I started to actually take advantage of the grace and the freedom that they gave me. Because I was like, well, if I go do these things, I know they're going to forgive me. Firstly, hopefully they don't find out, but when they do, they'll forgive me and they'll have grace for me, right? And so I started to kind of roll into this bad behavior, and I thought I was so smart, and I thought I had them all fooled because I'd go to youth group and, go to church and then go do my thing with my friends on the weekends or whenever, or sneak out of the house or whatever. And I kept kind of getting away with it, and then even when they knew, right, like I said, I just knew that there was grace, I knew there was forgiveness, and so I was kind of living this double life. And I think that's what we do when we misunderstand the grace of God. We end up living a double life. We end up coming and stepping in, and it's not like we're faking it, because when I went to youth group, I was like, oh yes, Jesus, I know you're good. Like, I was going to the altar calls every week. I got saved like 35,000 times. Like, it wasn't like I was faking it, because I meant it, because when you're in his presence, you mean it. But then I would step out, and because I was misunderstanding grace, I'd go, okay, I'm just going to go over here, because I still had more of a fear of my friends and what they thought of me. I didn't call it fear, but I had this, like, I wanted so badly to fit in. But then it got to the point where I took it too far. And I ended up, there's kids in the room, so I'll just say, partaking of some substances that I should not have. And my parents found out, actually, they were informed, they had an informant in the house. I won't say who it is, I'll just give you her initials, Tammy Bua. Ended up, she's up in Ridgecrest, so it's fine. She's given me permission to share this before. But she, genuinely out of concern for me, because I was like, oh yeah, no, we're bonding. I'm going to tell you this thing. And she's like, no, this is not good. And she goes and tells my parents, and there was a lot in that moment that actually God revealed to me about just, again, their grace and his grace to me. But they also showed me, I remember sitting on the couch in the living room, and it was a terrifying conversation. And I remember they showed me grace, and when I expected punishment, they actually gave me grace, but they also spoke me through what this path would lead to. They took me down, this is where you're going if you don't quickly course correct. And you think you can handle it, but you can't. And they also showed me the depth of grief that it was causing them. And I feel like that was one of the pivotal moments in my life that I realized that if I continued on this path, I was going to bring so much damage to myself and to the parents that I loved, and to our relationship, and to many relationships. And that fear of going the wrong way, and of damaging those relationships, and of hurting my parents actually helped me to really turn my life around. It's when I recommitted my life to Jesus as a teenager, and I really turned things around. We have to realize that we cannot misunderstand the grace of God, because his grace gives us forgiveness, and he does let us into freedom, but we have to understand that if we don't learn what it is to have an awe and respect of who he is and what he says and what his ways are, and if we don't stop kind of just going our own way because we think, well, he's going to figure it out later anyway, and it's going to be fine, and he's going to forgive me and all of that, we end up in this path of destruction that will jack up your life and everybody around you. You will take everybody around you down if you don't start to understand that this awe and respect of him actually leads us on the right path. Is this making sense? You're very quiet. I don't care. It's fine. I was thinking, two of the scriptures that were brought up in the study this week were in Exodus about the Israelites, and how this is one of my favorites. It's actually one of the most transformative stories for me, because I started to understand here where God had actually given people way long ago, before Jesus, an opportunity to know him face to face, but they rejected him. So John Bevere ends up sharing a little bit of the story of how the Israelites come to Mount Sinai and God reveals himself, and it's a little bit terrifying. But the parts that stood out to me, that God it's almost like he took them out of my Bible and like lit them up in my face, is the last verse of each of those sections that he read, Exodus 20:21, and it says this. And I want you to also remember that it actually talked about how it says Moses was terrified. Moses was not like, guys, this is fine. It's just, God on a mountain with thunder and lightning and terrifying. I'm fine. He's actually terrified, right? He's actually terrified. And yet it says this. The people remained at a distance while Moses approaches the thick darkness where God was. The people, the fear of God kept them over here. Well, let us just do, and how did that turn out for them? They just kept on in their rebellion, and he kept forgiving them, and then they go back to their rebellion, and then he'd forgive them, and it was like this endless, it was awful for them. Awful. 40 years in the wilderness, but that's only just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, there's so much. They kept getting taken back into captivity all throughout history. Yet Moses, he's terrified, and yet he goes, but I will go because I know this God. Because I know him, and I know his ways are better. And when everybody else remained at a distance, Moses approaches the thick darkness. Sometimes stepping into who God is and his holiness can be very terrifying because we don't know where he's going to lead us. Do it anyway. Do it afraid. There's somebody who wrote a book like that. Do it afraid. I don't know. If not, let's write it. And then the other scripture that was quoted, and again, the last line is what stood out to me in Exodus 19:19. Says, Moses spoke, and the voice of God answered him. He was terrified, and yet he chose to step in anyway, and when he spoke, the God of the universe answered him. How many of you guys have had a moment where you just are so impacted by the Holy Spirit, or you hear God's voice, or you've had a miracle happen in your life? Have you stopped in awe to go, the God of the universe just spoke to me? The God of the universe just gave me that miracle. The God of the universe provided that for me. The God of the universe protected me in that situation. Amen. Moses spoke, and the voice of God answered him. There's been this whole movement, it's probably been forever, but I don't know, somebody's taken credit for it in the last couple decades, that talks about how we need to face our fear, right? And the whole idea of facing your fear is if you're afraid of heights, go bungee jumping, and you face your fear, and you smack it in the face, right? And the whole idea is that when you face that fear, the fear, you'll actually get rid of it. You'll conquer the fear. But I kept on thinking that. I felt like God kept saying that to me over and over and over and over again this week. Face your fear. Face your fear. Face your fear. But when I put it in context of this, of that he's the one that we're supposed to fear above all else. Not afraid, but respect, reverence, awe, holiness, holy awe, holy fear. Face your fear. Because when you face that fear, you don't conquer it. You conquer this. You conquer your old person, the old man who keeps trying to pull you back into the junk. When you face your fear, when you come face to face with the only being, the only thing, the only God who actually deserves our fear, who actually deserves our reverence like that, when we come face to face with him, it changes everything. So I want to encourage you to face your fear this week and for the rest of your life. Hello, welcome. Oswald Chambers said this: the remarkable thing about fearing God is that when you fear God, you fear nothing else. Whereas when you do not fear God, you fear everything else. The truth is, many of us have so many different fears, and those fears are literally cramming up the space in our minds. They're all these little fears, and some of them we don't even recognize as fear. But there are so many things, the fear of even something happening to our kids. And those things get stuck into our brains, into our hearts, into our soul. And all of these little fears end up taking up so much space in our lives. And we have so many different things that we're afraid of all the time. And I think one of the enemy's tricks is convincing us that it's not actually fear. But when you actually, I want to encourage you, when you're struggling with something, try to go to the root of it. And often, most often, it's going to be fear at the root. Fear of man, fear of failure, fear of rejection, right? Fear of not having enough. Fear of, kind of rejection too. Fear of dealing with issues because you're afraid that people will reject you. Almost everything, it's almost everything comes back to a fear. But when we actually take on the fear of God, and we understand who he is, my table's too big for this, but when we understand who he is and we start to go, oh, in each of these situations, okay, I'm afraid of rejection, but you know what? Who cares if they reject me? Because if I do the thing that God wants for me, then even if they reject me, it's okay. He's got me. You want to know how badly Jesus was rejected? How badly he was betrayed? And yet in that moment, he says, forgive them because they don't know what they're doing. And suddenly when we replace the wrong fears, the fear of man, with the fear of God, he comes in and he gets rid of these things. When we look at our lives and we go, man, I'm so afraid that my children are going to end up on the wrong path, and what do I do, and how do I fix this, and how do I manipulate, and how do I make sure that they're always protected, and all of these things, and all of this fear is all here all the time. And then we suddenly go, oh, but hold on. God is the one who created him, and he ordered their steps. He created them exactly, and he put them in this family. And if I will just do exactly what the word says and raise them in the way that they should go, then they're going to be just fine. And I need to realize that he loves them way more than I do anyway. But what about my bank account? What if I don't have enough for rent next week? What if I don't have enough to cover those bills? What if I don't have enough to cover my taxes? What if I do? Now you start to make all these decisions based on that fear, and now you're starting to cut corners or just live. How many of you guys have ever lived with that weight of like debt or junk or financial stuff, and it's like this dark cloud, and it's like this fear that's kind of always there with you, but then suddenly you go, oh, hold on. The word says don't worry about it because he clothes the sparrows and the lilies, and he actually owns more than the cattle on 1,000 hills, and so he will protect me and he will take care of me, and no matter what my life looks like, he's got me. Do you guys get the point? Then when we start to actually look at each of the I need to get all these little ones off here. When we start to look at all the little things that we're afraid of, and then we start to realize that actually he has the answer to every single one of them. And that is that if you will trust me, if you will put your awe and your respect and your focus on me instead of on all these stupid worries, then you are not going to have space for them anymore. They're not going to be able to take up the time. And do you know how much more time and space you're going to have for all the things that he actually has for you if you will stop worrying about all the things that have been consuming your mind that you actually have no control over anyway? I read something really fascinating and also a little depressing, so I wanted to share with you, and some of you guys probably already know this. But an example of bad fear. In 1916, there was a woman named Hetty Green. Have anybody heard of her? She's been called America's greatest miser. When she died in 1916, her estate was valued at $100 million in 1916. $100 million. And yet, Hetty Green ate cold oatmeal every day because she didn't want to pay to heat up the hot water for her oatmeal. Way more depressing than that. Her son got an infection in his leg, and she did not want to spend the money to go to a doctor, so she tried to take him to a free clinic, and eventually his leg had to be amputated because she wouldn't just go pay for a good doctor. All of this was because Hetty was so afraid of losing her wealth that she never actually used it. She was so afraid of losing. She had such a poverty spirit. She died with $100 million with no life being lived. And she couldn't take it with her. Can you imagine if Hetty Green had just shifted her fear away from poverty, away from lack, to holy God? And she had to instead ask questions like, God, what can I do with this money? God, what can I do to bless my son? Not just get him the basic care he needs, but actually bless my son. How could she have shifted and changed her own generational line? God, what could I do to advance your kingdom with this money that you gave me? It's his anyway. Can you imagine the difference if she had shifted her fear from earthly things that the enemy is trying to throw at us instead to a holy fear of God? But instead, she spent her life fearing what is temporary. Maybe your fears aren't quite that extreme. But here's the truth. If you fear anything but God, it will rob you of the life that he has for you. It will rob you of the life that you're meant to live. If you choose to fear anything but God, it will rob you of the life that he has for you. God fear is good fear. It puts everything else into perspective. Do you guys hear that? If you hear nothing else today, God fear is good fear. All other fears, not good. Especially when lived in the extreme. Why were the disciples, Jesus' disciples and the early church, able to advance the kingdom and blow the church up as quickly and as amazingly as they did? Why were they willing to go and withstand imprisonment and beatings, and all of them except John, eventually death, eventually be martyred? Why were they willing? Why were they able to withstand all of that and do all of that? Because they had a fear of God. They understood who this Jesus is. They saw him and they heard of him and they witnessed how holy and worthy he is, and it put everything else as nothing compared to him. Something else that stood out for me this week on, I think it was day 6, was he was talking about Thomas Aquinas, who in like 1200 something was an amazing philosopher and theologian. Actually, I read that years later, the Catholic Church ended up adopting his theology as their main theology. So I'm not saying it's perfect, but this man was brilliant. Brilliant. And it talked about how after he wrote what he called, I think it was called Summa Theologica or something like that. And he said it was his greatest work. But then he had an encounter with God and he stopped writing. Sorry. Water. He had this encounter with God and he actually stopped writing. And when a friend of his asked him, "Why aren't you writing? You're so brilliant. You have so much." And he said, "When I actually have faced how holy and good God is, I realize that everything else I have ever written is like straw compared to him." This man was brilliant in the world's eyes, in the church's eyes. And that's the kind of awe I want us all to have of him, that we go, not that we need to stop writing, but that we need to actually go, man, he is so holy. He is so good. He is so worthy. Nothing else compares. We have to stop chasing all these other things. For our kids, I mean, so many of us, I just finally got my kids like in some extracurricular activities because I've been so crazy. But it's like I'm realizing, I look around at some of the other parents and it's like their whole life becomes about their kids and getting their kids to all these different events and all these different things. And what for? Like, yes, I'm all for have your kids go have fun, but like, come on, guys. Is that more important? Are you creating sports or school or your career or even your relationships? Are you creating your house or your success or anything like that as higher than who God is? Because if you are, you need to whack that down right now. You need to rebuild. You need to rebuild your priorities and your values. I'm not yelling at you. I'm sorry. I'm just like, I'm serious. Like this has to matter more than anything. This has to matter more than anything. Who he is and who we are in him has to matter more than anything. It has to be the thing that helps us to make every decision, every step is determined by who he is. Whew. You guys still with me? All right, good. Thank you. Okay. We all in our lives have plants, things that we want to water and that we want to see grow, right? And we have weeds in our life that we want to kill. But the problem is, sometimes we water the weeds and they choke out the plants. We all have this desire to grow in our relationship with God, right? But sometimes instead of watering that relationship, we're watering all the worries and the doubts and all the other stuff, even the good stuff, even family, even career, even our dreams, all those things. When we water those things and we neglect who God is, those things will actually choke out who he is. But if you will actually water the right thing, put him first, seek him first, understand his worth and his value, then he flourishes in your life. Suddenly, what is it that Solomon said? The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. So when we actually put him first and we fear him most and we fear him above all else and we have this awe and respect for him, now suddenly we're given wisdom to know how to do all the other stuff and how to not let it destroy us or overtake us, right? And all the good things get to become even better. Acts 17, 27, 28 says this: God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him. There's another translation that actually says feel him, that we would actually tangibly be able to feel his presence, though he is not far from any one of us. And this is one of my favorite scriptures: for in him we live and we move and we have our being. In him we live and we move and we have our being. I believe that the fear of God is a 24/7, 365 days a year awareness that he is holy, that we have a holy and a just and a worthy and an awesome God who deserves our best and he deserves our all and nothing less. That is the fear of God, is this awareness, this constant awareness that he is good. As we close, I just want to share with you 3 things that a healthy fear of God understands. The first one is a healthy fear of God understands his greatness, understands how massive, huge, worthy he is. He is still the God who thunders on the mountains. He is still the God who is surrounded right now, like I shared about during worship. He is surrounded right now in this stadium, this cathedral of like billions of spiritual beings and angels and seraphim worshiping him. And the great cloud of witnesses and all those who have come before him on their knees in worship constantly, and it never gets old because that's how good he is. And there's so much more. I think there's so much more that we do in eternity than just that, but that's where it starts. That's where it starts, is that he's that worthy. He is still the God who rains down fire on false gods. Remember the story of Elijah? He is still that God. There is no other. We cannot make other idols above him. He is still that God. He is still the God who shuts the mouths of lions. He is still the God who will stop at nothing to rescue his people. He is still the one whose death literally shook the whole earth. He is still the one who went down to hell to defeat death and raise the dead back to life. He is still the one who then was resurrected himself to give us all the chance at eternal life. He is still that God, and he changed everything in that moment. Without understanding God's greatness, we limit him and we bring him down to a manageable size that we can handle. But when we do that, we're actually causing ourselves to miss out on everything that he has for us. We're causing ourselves to actually then step foot onto this path of destruction. We have to have a healthy fear of God that understands his greatness. The second thing is a healthy fear of God understands his greatness and his goodness. I really, this is so important to me, because when we start to talk more about this fear of God, this awe of God, this respect of him, we can start to put him up there, scary God, and us down here. But when we actually then partner that with he is so good, he is so good, he is so trustworthy, he is so kind to us, he does everything for us, he already has and he always will. When we partner that with the fact that he is such a good God, when my kids make mistakes and make messes in their lives, or especially as they get older, as they do things that they know I wouldn't want for them, or they get into some kind of trouble, I don't want them to run from me. I want them to run to me. But that actually involves me, as they grow and as they're little, starting to show them that I'm safe and I'm good. And though I may lose my tantrum, may have a tantrum sometimes and lose my temper sometimes, I will always go back and love them. And unlike God, he doesn't ever lose his temper. But I have to show my kids, I am good and I'm for you, and I will do anything for you. And I will always protect you. And even if you make a giant mess, I will be there for you. My 4-year-old daughter, Taylor, I walked into our living area last week, I think, or 2 weeks ago. And on our table, there's all the sticky stuff. I'm like, what is this sticky stuff? And I start trying to what is this? It's maple syrup all over. And it's on the table, and it's dripping down from the table, and it's on other things. And so I start the mom walk, and I'm like, hey, Braden, are you playing with maple syrup? No. And I go down, and I know. And I didn't even have to just have the mom know. I had she has sticky fingers know. And I'm like, Taylor, were you playing with maple syrup or eating it? No. Are you sure? Yeah, it was Braden. It was Bubba. She calls him Bubba. It was Bubba. I was like, honey, it wasn't Bubba. He wasn't even in here. It was KK. It was KK, not me. And it took a little bit, and I was like, I had to have a little conversation about, we could clean up messes, but don't lie, because then I can't try. We had that whole conversation, But most of all, I had to get down on her level and say, hey, baby, it's okay. I'm going to help you clean it. You're not in trouble. Maybe next time just ask before you dump maple syrup everywhere. But it's okay. It's going to be okay. And obviously there's times where kids need consequences and not punishment. They need boundaries. They need all of that stuff. Absolutely. But for my 4-year-old in that moment, I saw her getting afraid of what was coming. And I had to reassure her, baby, I'm going to help you. I'm here to help you. I'm always going to help you clean up your messes. And this is the God we serve. He is a God that is safe, and we can trust him. And when we make messes, he's going, I see your sticky fingers. Let's just go clean it up. You don't need to be afraid. You don't need to run and cover yourself. You don't need to hide. I am the God who loves you. Without understanding his goodness, we start to become legalistic. And either we will dive into the fear of God, but it will be with misunderstanding. And that's when we do become legalistic. And then we start to point fingers at everybody else who's not following the law. And then we become Pharisees. Or when we don't understand his goodness, we just run. And we go over here into Graceland. And we're constantly okay, I'm messed up and I'm just going to go over here. And that's not actually connection with him. That's actually just manipulating his system. It's not actually relationship with him. But when we rightly understand the fear of God is attached to a God who is good. And he will always forgive us. And he will always be there for us. And his ways are always right. And he is great. And he is powerful. And he is huge. And he is, in some ways, a lot of ways, really terrifying. Because we cannot manage or control him. But he is good. He is good. We don't need to fear punishment. We need to fear the destruction that comes when we're not with him. A healthy fear of God understands his greatness, his goodness, and his glory. If you guys have already started or this study, or if you're going to this week, there's a few of the days that talk about God's glory. His glory is really the completeness, if that's a word, of who he is. His perfection. It's his greatness and his goodness combined. It's his love. It's all of it combined into this God. And what's amazing is that every time the people come into an encounter with the glory of God, it changes them. But actually, as humans, we can't see the full glory of God. When Moses even experienced just a bit of it, he came out glowing. When he asked to see the glory of God, God said, you have to turn because you can't actually see me because it would kill you. And we need to understand that the glimpses of God that we've seen are his presence. It's him without even all of his glory. It's like maybe 0.0000001% of his glory, if that. Because if we encountered more, it would kill us. Like we cannot handle all that he is. And we need to understand that this God is the God who's worthy of everything. He's worthy of all of us. I had a friend when I was in high school. It's my last story. I learned a lot from her. I really loved her. She's super passionate about God, knew a lot, really excited, was really good at helping me and like giving me godly advice. But she had this thing where she struggled a lot with wrestling with God and questioning him. Now, I don't mind a good wrestle with God. Just know that if you wrestle with God, you'll come out with a limp, like Jacob did. So I tend to try to avoid those. Like, let's just go, you're God, and I'm not. And I'm just going to be okay with it. I'm okay with a little bit of wrestle, but this friend of mine, she would wrestle a lot. She would question him a lot. And she was passionate and full of fervor and all of that stuff and really involved in the church and all of that. But she spent a lot of her time complaining about what God hadn't done and who he hadn't shown up as and why he hadn't shown up that way and what are you doing, God, and all that kind of stuff. And my friend now has barely a relationship with God to speak of. And I think that even though she had the commitment, she had the passion, she had the commitment to the church, she was involved, she would read her Bible, what she was lacking was a fear and awe of God. And that is what eventually led to her walking away. And she's just still struggling with the same, she hasn't fully walked away, but she's still just struggling with the same things. Because she lacked an awe and a reverence of, I don't get it all. I don't understand it all. But I know that you are great, and I know that you're good, and I know that you are full of glory that I can't even comprehend, and I know you are worth honoring. And I choose to surrender and submit myself to you. And the amazing thing is that when we surrender, he goes, all right, let's get up. Let's work together. Let's go. He doesn't keep us down. He's not the God who keeps us down and pushes us down and wants to make us feel small and insignificant. Read your Bible. He's constantly picking people up who felt like nothing, who were nothing, who messed up completely. And he goes, all right, let's go. You're the best kind to work with. Why? Because you're surrendered to me. Because you're not trying to go your own way with your own pride and your own junk in your life, right? Without understanding God's glory, we treat him casually rather than giving him the honor that he deserves. I want to invite you all to stand right now as we welcome up the worship team to close us out. I want to firstly just ask you to grab hold of any of these little blocks that you have in your mind, any of these things that are actually blocks in our minds. They're actually things that block us. These fears, these doubts, these why did that happen, or anxiety. Maybe it's about your kids, maybe it's about your career, relationships, your bank account, your marriage. Maybe there's a whole bunch. And I want to invite you to bring them right into your mind, right into your consciousness. And instead of you facing them, I want you to say to them, you face my God. You turn and face this holy God. And right now, God, I just feel like we're supposed to take a moment in the quiet just to ask God to reveal to us just a glimpse of his glory, a glimpse of his greatness, a glimpse of his goodness. invite you to surrender today to an awe, to a fear of God. I want to invite you today to throw away the fear of man, the fear of rejection, the fear of the unknown, the fear of anything else that might be getting in the way of you just diving fully, headfirst into Him. Become like the crazy people. Become like the ones who are fully abandoned to Him. God, will you take us all deeper? And whatever that looks like for you, whatever fully surrendering to Him today looks like to you, if you want to get on your knees, if you need to run up here for prayer, if you need to come forward to the altar, if you need to raise your hands or dance or run outside or whatever you need to do, if you need to sit quietly, whatever it looks like for you to fully surrender, I want to ask you to do that. Who cares what it looks like? Who cares what anybody else thinks? And if He's asking you to do something big today, do it. If He's asking you to take a massive risk, do it. If He's asking you to surrender something to Him, do it. Because I promise you that when you actually replace all the other stuff that you think you need with Him, He will give you abundantly more than you could ever imagine. God, you are good and you are holy. We love you.